The night was heavy over the small town. The clock had passed 2 after midnight, and the street lay silent, as if time itself had stopped. Inside a cramped room on the second floor of an old house, Jack lay on his bed, trying to sleep. But sleep had been avoiding him for days. Ever since he moved into this house, he had felt something strange, a heaviness in the air, an unnatural chill in the room, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Jack turned onto his right side, pulled the blanket tightly over his body, and tried to shut his eyes. But then he heard it, that first whisper. A faint sound, barely audible, coming from beneath the bed. Jack, his body froze. Was he imagining it? Or did he truly hear his name coming from under the bed? He opened his eyes slowly, his heart pounding violently, holding his breath in dread. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Jack, are you awake?" A shiver ran down his spine, his whole body trembling. He tried to convince himself it was just hallucination from exhaustion. But the voices didn't stop. They multiplied, layered, overlapping, like more than one person speaking at once from a narrow space, fragmented, broken. "Come with us. We've been here for so long. The bed isn't yours alone." He pulled the blanket tighter and yanked his feet away from the edge of the bed. He had always feared the idea of something hiding under there, but now he was actually hearing them. He squeezed his eyes shut and whispered to himself, "Just a dream, just a dream." But then he felt it, a cold touch brushing against his heel. He leapt out of bed violently, his heart about to burst out of his chest. He flicked on the light, gasping for breath, and his eyes darted to the shadows beneath the bed. Nothing, just emptiness. Only darkness. Slowly, he crouched down and peered underneath. Nothing but the endless dark. And yet he swore he heard heavy breathing coming from there. His body shook as he stumbled backward, muttering, "No, impossible. I'm just imagining this." But deep inside, Jack knew it wasn't his imagination. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, the weak yellow bulb above him flickering every few seconds, as if it were dying. He couldn't believe what was happening. Could there really be something alive beneath the bed? He dragged a small wooden chair carefully closer. His heart thundered, breath shallow, sweat dripping cold down his forehead. He sat on the chair, eyes locked on the void beneath the bed. The first minute passed slowly. The second, heavy silence. But in the third, it came again. Whispers, many voices, fragmented, faint, like souls trapped inside an old box. "Jack! Jack! Jack! You're one of us now." His body shuddered. They weren't just calling his name. They knew who he was. Swallowing hard, he decided to face it. He crept forward, his face close to the edge of the bed, straining his eyes into the shadows. And suddenly, he saw something. His eyes widened. Two small, glimmering eyes staring back at him from the darkness, before vanishing in an instant. Jack scrambled backward, the chair clattering to the floor, his heart nearly stopping from terror. "No, impossible, it's not real." But then came the reply, a whisper so clear, directly from under the bed. "We're here, and you are not alone." The air in the room shifted. It became colder than ice. His breath fogged before his face, like he was in the dead of winter. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer. Stumbling in panic, Jack rushed to the door. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked, as if sealed from the outside. He banged on it, shouting, "Open! Somebody help me!" But no one answered. The house was silent, deathly silent. Then, from beneath the bed came a sound of scraping, like hands clawing at the wooden floor. Slow, uneven, closer, closer. Jack staggered backward, screaming, "Stay away! Stay away from me!" But the sound was nearer than ever. And then, suddenly, a hand appeared, a pale, withered hand, its skin gray and cold, long crooked fingers stretching out from beneath the bed, reaching for his feet. Jack froze in place. He couldn't move. His eyes locked on the hand, creeping toward him. Just before it touched him, it stopped, then slowly retreated back into the darkness. But the whispers continued. "It's too early, just the first night. You haven't seen everything yet." Jack collapsed onto the floor, trembling, tears spilling down his face. He stayed awake the rest of the night, the weak bulb burning overhead, his eyes glued to the bed, too afraid to even blink. And in the final moments before sunrise, he heard one last whisper, right at his ear. "See you tomorrow night, Jack." The morning sun slipped through the cracks of the broken wooden window, yet it couldn't chase away the darkness inside Jack. He sat at the edge of the bed, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness, mind heavy with fear, body trembling. Last night had been a living nightmare, but he knew it hadn't been just a dream. He reached down to his left leg and suddenly felt something strange. Rolling up his pants, he saw it, a dark blue mark like a bruise on his heel. He froze. Was this from the hand that touched him? Jack jumped up, hurrying to the cracked mirror in the corner of the room. His face was pale, dark circles beneath his eyes, lips dry. But what terrified him more was the long scratch across his arm, as if a long hand had raked his skin while he slept. No, impossible. I must have done this to myself in my sleep. He tried to convince himself, but deep down he knew the truth. Something had touched him. The rest of the day passed in dread. He didn't leave the house, didn't go near the bed. He sat in the living room chair, the TV murmuring low, eyes fixed on the door to his bedroom. Every minute that ticked by only made the fear heavier. And when the sun went down, the chill returned. It was as if the entire house transformed into something else after dark. As midnight neared, he heard it again, the scratching, coming from inside the room. The sound of nails dragging across wood beneath the bed, broken, uneven, unending. Jack grabbed a small flashlight. He had to face this. He stood at the door, opening it slowly. The sound stopped at once. Stepping carefully inside, he shone the beam across the floorboards. He crept closer to the bed, knees shaking, heart hammering against his ribs. He crouched, tilted the flashlight under the bed. Empty. But then, his eyes caught something in the farthest corner. A small, strange object. A human fingernail. Old, brittle as though torn off someone years ago. Jack gasped, dropping the flashlight. He stumbled backward, crashing against the wall. And while he was still shaking, the voice returned. "Jack, those bruises won't be the last." The whisper came from everywhere, as though the walls themselves were speaking. The clock neared 3 a.m. Jack stayed huddled in the corner, wide-eyed, too afraid to blink. Then, the flashlight on the floor flickered back to life on its own. The beam swung toward the edge of the bed. And there, 4 pale fingers emerged slowly, dragging across the floor, as if carving lines into the wood. Jack couldn't scream, his throat locked tight. The fingers slid back beneath the bed, leaving behind a fresh murmur. "We still have so much to show you, Jack, so much." Jack's head spun. The room blurred. He tried to stand, then collapsed to the floor, unconscious. When he opened his eyes again, he was still in the room. But now something was written on the floor in front of the bed, written in blood. Jack stared in disbelief, as though the nightmare was being written for him, page by page. Jack spent the rest of the following day half dead with fear. The marks on his body were still there, the dark bruise on his leg, the long scratch down his arm. And the floor, the bloody words that had spelled "the next chapter has begun," had vanished with the sunrise, as if they had never been there at all. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I really am just hallucinating. He spoke to himself, voice trembling. Maybe it's just the lack of sleep, or this old house making strange noises. But every time he came near the bed, his heart recoiled. The room itself had become like a dark trap, swallowing him whole whenever he stepped inside. He decided to go out. Throwing on his clothes quickly, he hurried down the street. The fresh air hit his face, and the sight of people coming and going gave him a fragile sense of safety. He went to a small cafe in the center of town, sat at a corner table, and ordered a black coffee. He tried to convince himself it was nothing but stress. But as he stirred the spoon in his cup, he noticed something. The sugar dissolving in the coffee began to swirl into a strange shape, a hand with 5 fingers. He froze. The spoon slipped from his hand, clattering against the cup, the sharp sound echoing through the cafe. People turned to stare, but he didn't care. Only one thought filled his mind. Impossible, even here. He returned home, fighting the terror clawing at his chest. "I can't believe this. If I keep accepting every little sign, I'll lose my mind. That night, he decided to sleep in the living room, away from the bed. He pulled a blanket over himself and laid down on the couch, leaving the TV on low for comfort. Hours passed. The clock struck 2 a.m. His eyes grew heavy, and he started to drift. But then the whisper followed him. "Jack, you can't run. You never will." He snapped his eyes open, his head ringing with fear. The sound wasn't coming from a bedroom. It was coming from under the couch he was lying on. Jack leapt up in terror, crashing onto the floor. He glanced under the couch. Nothing but emptiness. But on the carpet, etched in clear, jagged scratches, were the words, "The bed is ours, and escape is impossible." Jack clutched his head in both hands, tears burning his eyes. "I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy." That night was different. Jack tried everything to avoid the bed. He had slept in the living room the night before, but the entity had followed him there. The whispers had crawled from beneath the couch. Tonight, he decided to stay awake no matter what. He had coffee ready, every light in the house switched on, and earphones jammed in his ears to block out the voices. But at 2 a.m., the power suddenly went out. Jack froze. The living room drowned in darkness. The only sound was his own breathing. And then the old voice returned, fainter than before, but still clear. "Jack, come to the bed." He tore the earphones out, his heart pounding like war drums. "I'm not going back to that room. Never." But his voice came out weak, as if even he didn't believe it. After minutes of silence, something strange began to happen. A bitter, unnatural cold spread through the room. Jack grabbed a blanket and pulled it over himself, but his body still trembled, freezing from the inside out. Then he heard it, scratching on the floor. Not from the bedroom. No, it was coming from the hallway between the living room and his bedroom. Something was crawling, dragging its limbs across the wooden floor, heading straight for him. Jack shot to his feet, stumbling back until his spine slammed against the wall. The darkness in front of him began to move, stretching, as though a shadow was spilling out of the bedroom, reaching toward him. "Why are you running? This house is ours, and so are you." The voice was doubled now, a man and a woman speaking at once, fused into a single whisper. And suddenly, he felt it. A cold hand brushed against his ankle beneath the blanket. He screamed and crashed to the floor. But the hand didn't let go. On the contrary, its icy grip tightened, clamping around his heel, pulling him into the darkness. Jack kicked and thrashed. "Get away from me. Let me go." But it was useless. The hand was frail, skeletal, and impossibly strong. He was dragged a full meter toward the bedroom door. His fingernails tore into the wooden floor as he fought to resist. And then the lights came back on. The hand vanished. Jack lay sprawled on the floor, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward the bed. Beneath it, a pair of glowing eyes blinked back at him. But not just one pair. Not two. Dozens. Dozens of eyes, all locked on him. Jack snapped. He bolted toward the front door, yanking at the handle with all his strength. But it wouldn't move. Some unseen force held it shut. And then the whispers returned, louder than ever before, echoing through the house. "Don't run. Jack, this isn't over. Tonight has only just begun." Jack spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor, his back pressed against the wall, his eyes locked on the bed. He didn't sleep for even a second. With the first ray of sunlight, an urge consumed him. He had to know the truth. What was happening in that house? And why the bed of all things? He decided to go out, maybe find some answers. In the middle of town, there was an old library, rarely open. Its wooden door was layered with dust, and the sign above it read, "Town Records." Jack stepped inside and began searching. Hours passed as he sifted through yellowed files and faded newspapers. Finally, his eyes landed on an article dated 1923. The headline froze his blood. "The Missing Family of the Old Howell House." He read intently. An entire family vanished from the home at the edge of town. Their bodies were never found. Neighbors reported hearing screams, and scratching noises coming from the house before the disappearance. Jack gasped audibly. The house they were describing was his house. He turned the page and noticed a handwritten note scribbled in the margin. It is said that anyone who sleeps on the family's bed hears their whispers and is slowly dragged into their fate. Dizziness washed over him. The bed wasn't just old furniture, it was the gateway. As Jack left the library, he passed an old woman sitting in a chair outside the shop across the street. She looked at him with strange eyes, as if she already knew everything. Her voice was raspy when she spoke. "You live in that house, don't you?" Jack froze. "Yeah, why?" The old woman lowered her gaze to the ground. "Your mistake was stepping into that room. No one comes back whole after the first touch." Jack moved closer, desperate. "What's happening? Tell me." She slowly lifted her head, her eyes heavy with dread, and whispered, "They don't want to let you go. That bed isn't yours, Jack. It's an open grave. And those who crawl out of it never return." Jack walked back home, his chest tight, barely able to breathe from the weight of fear. Every word he had read, every warning he had heard, confirmed it. He had stepped into a trap he could never escape. He stopped at his bedroom door. Even in broad daylight, the whispers were clear, rising all around him. "Jack, you know our secret now, and now it's your turn." Night fell faster than Jack expected. He tried to stay awake, but his mind was exhausted, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. He sat in the living room, clutching a cup of cold coffee, every second echoing with the old woman's words. "That bed is an open grave." The clock struck 2:30. The house went silent, an eerie silence, as if every sound had been pulled out of time itself. Jack knew this night was different. His heart whispered that the visit would be greater than ever before. A dragging noise started inside the bedroom. Not just scratching, this was heavier, like a body pulling itself across the wooden floor. Jack stood, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped slowly toward the door. He pushed it open carefully. The room was drowned in a suffocating blackness. Jack knelt, angled the flashlight toward the void beneath the bed. At first, nothing but the same empty darkness he'd seen before. But then, in a blink, a face appeared. A pale corpse-like face, skin ghostly, bones jutting, eyes black and bottomless. The mouth gaped open, lined with long, yellowed teeth. Jack gasped and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. But the face didn't vanish. On the contrary, it began to crawl out. From beneath the bed, the creature pulled itself into the room. It was taller than Jack expected, its limbs unnatural, long, spindly arms ending in claw-like fingers. Its body was thin, torn in places as if scarred by old burns. And worst of all, its voice. When it lifted its head and stared at Jack, overlapping whispers poured from its gaping mouth. "Jack! Jack! I've been waiting for you." Jack scrambled backward, his heart hammering as if it would burst. The creature crawled halfway into the room, its eyes fixed on him. Jack shouted, "What do you want from me? Why me?" The creature tilted its head, and a chorus of whispers answered at once. "You sleep in our grave, and those who enter become one of us." Then, in a sudden, unnatural lunge, it surged toward Jack. Its cold hand clamped around his ankle, dragging him down to the floor. He screamed, kicked, fought, but its grip was iron. Darkness seemed to swallow him whole, as if the room itself had become a gaping mouth. And then, suddenly, the creature stopped. It released him, retreating back beneath the bed, dragging its twisted body into the void. The whispers followed. Not yet, Jack tonight was only a glimpse. Jack lay sprawled on the floor, eyes wide, his whole body shaking. For the first time, he had seen the creature in full, and the horrifying truth struck him. The worst was still to come. Jack couldn't close his eyes all night. The grotesque body that had crawled out from beneath the bed was carved into his mind like a curse. Even when the sun rose, the room didn't lose its darkness, as if the night itself was nesting inside it. He sat in the living room, thinking of leaving the house forever. But every time he reached for the front door, The handle turned ice cold, freezing solid, as though bound by invisible chains. The house would not let him go. Night came, and the air grew so heavy that Jack felt as though he was breathing in dust. The whispers began earlier this time, long before midnight. "Jack, come, your time has come." Jack staggered backward until he found himself standing at the bedroom door. His legs trembled, yet he couldn't control them. It was as if something was pushing him inside. The room was a pit of blackness. With his first step, the very floor shifted beneath him, rippling like a wave, dragging him toward the bed. Jack tried to grab the chair near the door, but toppled. The floor had become slick, pulling his body until he was pressed against the edge of the bed. And then, out of the shadows, 4 hands emerged, cold, bony, covered in scratches. They seized his arms and legs all at once. He screamed, but the whispers drowned his voice. "Withus, Forever." In an instant, the floor beneath the bed split open like the mouth of a pit. Not wood, an endless black void. Half of Jack's body was yanked below. He saw himself sinking into a world filled with distant screams and pale faces suspended in the dark. Each face stared at him, eyes extinguished, mouths forever open in an endless, silent wail. Jack felt himself tearing away from the real world. His voice vanished. Even his breath was smothered. In pure desperation, he reached out, clutching the wooden edge of the bed with all his strength. His nails dug deep into the wood. With one final surge, he ripped his arm free from the clawing hands and dragged himself out. He collapsed onto the floor, chest heaving like a mad drum, sweat soaking through his clothes. The whispers did not fade. They laughed, an inhuman, echoing laugh. "You escaped tonight, Jack, but tomorrow you won't." Jack now understood this was no mere haunted house. It was a hellish force, dragging him deeper into its world, and each night the pull grew stronger. Jack couldn't stay in the house any longer. With the first light of morning, he ran through the streets as if fleeing from a postponed death. People stared at him, his clothes torn, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, his face pale like a corpse still standing on its feet. He stopped in front of a small cafe, trying to calm down, trying to drink something warm. But before he could lift the cup to his lips, a rough voice came from the table beside him. "You're sleeping in the wrong house." Jack turned his head. An old man sat there, wearing a worn black coat. His faded gray eyes looked as if they saw far more than they should. On the table in front of him lay a small, tattered book. Jack tried to ignore him, but the old man smiled faintly. "The family that whispers to you. You've heard them, haven't you?" Jack froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. How do you know?" The old man leaned closer and whispered calmly. "I'm the only one who ever came out from under the bed." Jack lunged toward him, desperate. "How? Tell me how to stop it. How to save myself." The old man slid the small book across the table, opening a page filled with strange drawings. Circles, symbols, shapes impossible to understand. He said, "There are rituals that can seal the gate beneath the bed, but there is always a price." Jack shouted, "Any price. I don't care. Just let me live." The old man's eyes widened, his voice dropping low. "The price is always a human soul. Either you give them yours, or you offer a replacement." Jack felt dizzy. "Replacement? You mean someone else?" The old man nodded slowly. "The curse of the bed shows no mercy. If you want out, someone else must go in your place. If not, they'll drag your soul into the void tomorrow night, and you won't come back." Jack staggered back, his heart hammering. "I sacrifice someone else?" The old man gave a cold, empty smile. "The choice is yours, Jack. But remember, time isn't on your side." When Jack returned home, the house was unusually silent. But the bed, it trembled ever so slightly, as if those beneath it were waiting for his answer. The whispers returned, soft but dripping with malice. "Who will you choose?" "Jack." Jack spent long hours sitting in front of the bed, his eyes fixed on the wood that hid an entire hell beneath it. The words of the strange man still echoed in his mind. Someone else must take your place. Jack slammed his hand against his forehead. Impossible. I'm not a killer. I won't sacrifice an innocent. He decided to try something simple. He gathered all the salt in the kitchen and drew a circle around the bed. He recited aloud scattered verses and phrases he remembered from old religious books. But the result was worse. With the first word, the walls began to crack, and the salt scattered as if swept away by an invisible force. The whispers rose into a deafening chorus. Your words are weak, your presence weaker. The bed shifted, taking a small step forward. Jack fell to the floor, tears streaming down his face from terror. He thought about running. He packed his bag quickly and ran toward the front door with all his strength. But the moment he grabbed the handle, it melted beneath his hand, transforming into black, cracked wood. Jack gasped and stepped back. From the heart of the door came the sound of children laughing hoarsely, followed by the scream of a woman strangled halfway. There's no escape. Jack, this house is your grave. In desperation, he grabbed a lighter and set a small flame at the edge of the mattress. The fire caught immediately, but then it went out instantly for no reason. Instead of burning, the bed exhaled black smoke that filled the entire room. Jack coughed until he fell to his knees. The smoke began to take shape before him. The faces of the lost family. Men, women, and children. Their eyes extinguished, mouths open in silent screams. They all stared at him. One of them reached out, pointing directly at Jack's chest. And a single voice came out of all their mouths at once. You are the replacement, Jack. Jack covered his ears, screaming, Enough! I won't give you anyone. Kill me if you must, but I will not sacrifice an innocent human. The whispers suddenly stopped. The room sank into a heavy silence. Then came the voice, deep, cold, inhuman. Then prepare, the next night, the end. Jack collapsed onto the floor, knowing that time was running out, and that he would have to choose before the next night. The night fell faster than any before. It was as if the sun itself had retreated, afraid of what was coming. Jack sat in the living room, his eyes fixed on the bedroom door, which now looked like the gaping mouth of a monstrous beast waiting for him to enter. His clock had stopped at 12 o'clock. The hands didn't move, and every time he looked at it, he felt as if time itself was trapped with him. Then he heard the first sound. Slow footsteps. Not from the house. No, from beneath the ground. The floor beneath the bed began to tremble. Jack ran to grab a table, trying to steady himself, but the pull began without them even touching him. A mysterious force yanked his body toward the room, as if every particle in the house was drawing him there. Jack screamed at the top of his lungs. You won't take me. Not tonight. He grabbed the wall with his hands until his fingers were cut from the pressure. From beneath the bed emerged the entire family. Distorted faces, broken bodies, eyes as dark as coal. One by one, they crawled out, their voices merging into terrifying whispers. Jack, with us forever. Jack froze, gasping for breath. I'm not one of you, but the small child among them raised a hand and pointed at him. You're part of it, just one step away. The floor itself opened. The wood beneath the bed became a massive chasm, as if the room was collapsing into a black void filled with screams. Jack moved quickly, trying to reach the front door, but the entire house sealed itself. The windows transformed into black mirrors, each reflecting his distorted image, as if he were already dead. The ground yanked at his legs. Half of his body was inside the void. He screamed at the top of his lungs, Help me! Anyone! But the only response was their laughter. In desperation, Jack remembered the book he had seen with the stranger. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began carving symbols into the floor with his blood. The pain was unbearable, but each line glowed momentarily before fading. The family advanced further, their cold hands touching his shoulders. Their whispers turned into screams. Fall! Jack pulled himself with all his strength, biting his lip until it bled. He shouted a word at random, but felt it come straight from his heart. Not mine. Suddenly, the pull stopped. The entire family froze in place. The void beneath the bed closed slowly, like a door locking over a terrible secret. Jack collapsed to the floor, trembling, unable to move. The whispers faded, but before disappearing, a deep voice said, "You still have one last night, and the choice still awaits you." Jack spent the entire day unable to move from fear. Every passing second, he heard the counting in his head. One last night, one last night. He sat in front of the bed, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse from screaming. Deep down, he knew that any attempt to escape would be useless. The house had become a prison, and the bed was the cursed key. As sunset came, he heard a knock at the door. He opened it, and there stood the strange man, the same black coat, the same gray eyes. He spoke quietly, "Jack, time is up. If you don't choose tonight, they will take your soul without return." Jack screamed at him, "I won't kill an innocent person just to save myself." The stranger smiled a sad smile. "I told you before, every gateway requires a sacrifice. The question isn't whether you'll sacrifice. The question is, who will you sacrifice?" Jack felt himself breaking inside. Images of his family, friends, even ordinary people he met on the street flashed through his mind. Who deserves to be dragged into a dark world with no return? Who deserves to be pulled into an eternal scream beneath the bed? Tears ran down his cheeks as he whispered, "Impossible. I will offer myself." He stood in front of the bed, his voice trembling but firm. "Listen to me. I've chosen take me. But leave everyone else alone." The entire room shook. The whispers rose suddenly, turning into a collective scream filled with anger and relief at the same time. Finally, the floor beneath the bed opened slowly, a dim red light rising from it. Many hands emerged, but this time there was no resistance. Jack opened his arms as if surrendering, tears flooding his face. Before the hands could grab him, the stranger entered the room in a single step, his voice booming for the first time. "Wait. Your sacrifice is not enough." Jack froze, his eyes wide. "What? What are you saying?" The stranger looked at him with a cold smile. "I told you, those who come out from under the bed always pay the price. This time, it's not just your soul, Jack. They want to." Jack screamed a scream without end, and realized that the end was not only near, but betrayal had come from the one he thought was his last hope. Jack stood in front of the bed, the cold hands gripping his legs and slowly pulling him in. The stranger stood behind him, eyes detached, a dark smile on his face. Jack screamed, "You lied to me. You said if I offer myself, it would be over." The stranger replied calmly, "This curse needs more than your soul. It needs a renewal of blood. And you are only the beginning." The hands pulled Jack halfway into the void. The darkness beneath him boiled. The sounds of thousands of screams pierced his mind. Suddenly, Jack noticed something strange. Amid the twisted, screaming faces, he saw the stranger's own face. Young, not old. The features were the same, but young, trapped in the darkness. Jack gasped. You're one of them?" The stranger gave a glacial smile. "I was like you. I chose to give them a substitute, and I survived, but survival is temporary. Every generation must give them a new sacrifice, or they will come for everyone." At that moment, something changed. The bed shook violently, and the voices rose louder than ever. The hands suddenly released Jack, as if confused. The stranger stepped back, eyes wide. "Impossible, not now." Jack, trying to pull himself out, heard a different whisper, not like the others. A single voice, soft but terrifying. "Jack, you are not the sacrifice he is." Instead of returning to Jack, the hands surged toward the stranger. The stranger screamed, "No, not me. He is a sacrifice. But dozens of hands grabbed him, pulling him into the void with all their strength. His face shifted from a smile to a desperate scream. In seconds, he vanished beneath the bed, and the gateway slammed shut with a resounding crash. The room went silent. The bed returned to stillness, like an ordinary piece of furniture. Jack collapsed to the floor, chest heaving, eyes wide in disbelief at what had just happened. But, before he could catch his breath, he heard one last whisper. "Thank you, Jack. The sacrifice has come, but the gateway will never close forever." Jack stepped out of the house at the first light of dawn. The streets were empty, the air calm. He looked back. The house stood still, the bed inside waiting. Jack smiled a faint smile, thinking he had survived. But at the last moment, the reflection in the house window showed his face twisted, like the faces of a lost family. The curse was not gone. It had only chosen a new time to return. "Jack! Jack!"